All right, welcome back to the CTMU. We left off on the end of page 30 with the extended superposition principle. And our resident mathematician, Nord, is going to go ahead and start us off.
All right, so the extended superposition principle. In quantum mechanics, the principle of superposition of dynamical states asserts that the possible dynamical states of a quantized system, like waves in general, can be linearly superposed, that each dynamical state can thus be represented by a vector belonging to an abstract vector space. The superposition principle permits the definition of so-called mixed states, consisting of many possible pure states, or defined sets of values definite sets of values of state parameters in such a superposition. State parameters can simultaneously have many values. I presume it's parameters. I don't know. My
It's just
English is not that
parameters.
good. Parameters,
Um,
not parameters.
yes.
Parameters.
Um,
Yeah.
so
Wonderful
superposition
English.
being kind of like
It
a
isn't
complex
it
of different
Schrodinger's cats?
positions. It's
Isn't that
almost
the
like
example of
a
superposition?
potential. Like if you think of the way potential or unmanifest potential is used in Platonism, it's kind of similar to that.
I, I can also give a. I don't know if I presume most people know Schrodinger's cats, but to give a quick run through. Imagine you have a cat in the box, right? And until you have opened the box, you don't know if the cat is alive or if the cat is dead. Therefore, the cat is in a superposition of both dead and alive at the same time. That's at least
yes,
how conceptually. I'm not sure if actually Schrodinger came up with that. I think my was when I may not have been. Perhaps he was too busy having fun with young with female students. That's a story for another time. Um,
that's a
the
story for now. No,
superposition.
no, I'm just gonna keep going, keep going.
uh, the superposition principle highlights certain problems with quantum mechanics. One problem is that quantum mechanics lacks a cogent model in which to interpret things like mixed states. Waves alone are not sufficient. Another problem is that according to the uncertainty principle, the last states of a pair of interacting particles are generally insufficient to fully determine their next states. This, of course, raises a question. How are their next states actually determined? What is the source of the extra tie-breaking measure of determinacy required to select the next events, collapse their wave functions? The answer is not, as some might suppose, randomness. Randomness amounts to acausality, or alternately to informational incompressibility with respect to any distributed causal template or ingredient of causal syntax. Thus, it is either no explanation at all, or it implies the existence of a cause exceeding the representative capacity of distributed laws of causality. But the former is both absurd and unscientific, and the latter requires that some explicit allowance be made for higher orders of causations. More of an allowance than may readily be discerned in a simple magical invocation of randomness. The superposition principle, like other aspects of quantum mechanics, is based on the assumption of physical Markovianism. Do we want to look up what Markovianism is?
Yes, let's go ahead and do that real quick.
Let
Markovianism.
like let's see. What do you think it is? I feel like it's Russian, perhaps. Who came up with it?
Uh, what?
Markovian. Andrei Markov.
In which the conditional probability distribution of future states of the process given the present state and all past states depends only upon the present state and not on any past states. Okay. So let me. Okay. So just the present state, not the
Yeah,
past
it's the only thing.
state.
And a little background on Andrei Markov. He's completely was a rebellious Russian student. Uh, that's about it I can discern. Uh, yeah. I don't know what type of rebel because I don't think he was. Well, he died in the Soviet Union, so he may have been a Marxist. I don't know. Uh, don't know. Not gonna waste my time on that more. Anyone who's listening can probably Google that themselves. Let's see. It refers to mixed states between adjacent events, ignoring the possibility of non-random temporarily. Is that temporal or just temporarily?
Temporally.
Temporally
Yeah.
extensive relationships, not wholly attributable to distributed laws. By putting temporally remote events in extended descriptive contact with each other, the extended superposition principle enables coherent cross-temporal telic feedback and thus plays a necessary role in cosmic self-configuration among the higher order determinant relationships in which events and objects can thus be implicated are utile state syntax relationships called telons, elic attractors capable of guiding cosmic and biological evolution. Given that quantum theory does not irrevocably attach to Markovianism, why has the possibility of higher order causal relationships not been seriously entertained? One reason is space-time geometry, which appears to confine objects to one-dimensional world lines, in which their state transition events are separated by intervening segments that prevent them from mixing in any globally meaningful way. And it is for this reason that superposition is usually applied only to individual state transitions, at least by those subscribing to conservative interpretations of quantum mechanics. Conspansive duality, which incorporates TD and CF components. Unsure what that stands for,
I believe
except
that's
CF.
topological descriptive, and CF was another one of those. Let's see, page 31. CF.
All I can think of is football, where it's like center forward.
Was it constructive filtrative? Yep. Okay.
A constructor, so. Right. Removes this restriction by placing state transition events in direct descriptive contact, because geometric intervals between events are generated and selected by descriptive processing. They no longer have separate force, yet since world lines actually reflect the distributive laws in terms of which state transitions are expressed, they are not reduced to the state of interpolated artifacts with no dynamic reality. Their separative qualities are merely overridden by the state syntax dynamic of their conspansive dual representation. In extending the superposition concept to include non-trivial higher order relationships, the extended superposition principle opens the door to meaning and design, because it also supports distribution relationships among states, events, and syntactic strata. It makes cosmogony a distributed, coherent, ongoing event rather than a event discarded from the ancient history of the cosmos. Indeed, the usual justification of observer participation that an observer in the present can perceptually collapse the wave function of ancient photo emission events can be regarded as a consequence of this logical relationship.
Wow, interesting. Very interesting, that last part. So basically extending, it's kind of like a privileged present that that's distributed, in that the present reconfigures in the manner of I'm assuming SCSPL, self-configuring self-processing language, reconfigures past and future states, probably relative to the capacity that they actually exist, but they might as well kind of exist in this systemization in a more meaningful way. Let's see. I wanted to take a look at, by putting temporally remote events in extended descriptive contact with each other, the extended superposition principle enables coherent cross-temporal telic feedback. So, yeah, that's just cross-temporal, so crossing time feedback. So it would reconfigure, like the reconfiguration of state and syntax would be, well, cross-temporal would be past, future, present, in that cosmic self-configuration. Okay, among the higher order determinant relationships in which events and objects can thus be implicated are utile state syntax, telons. Okay, so remember we went over telons a little bit at the very beginning, or at the beginning of one of the videos, when our boy Eat Raw Meat, or his username is something like that, but he made a little cheat sheet. Telon is like the object, like a subscription object for Tellor. So I'm thinking of it in my system like an object condition, but I also like telic attractor because there are kind of like these. What does Arval call them? He calls them attractor states when he talks about similar stuff. He probably kind of got that from this maybe. But in any case, I also wanted to see if anybody kind of gets this reference. Let me explain a little further. Why has the possibility of higher order causal relationships not been seriously entertained? And like the reason he gives here, like what is the distilled meaning of this? Like why is it that that higher order causal relationship hasn't already been considered in quantum mechanics, for instance? Is this clear to everyone? To anyone else, at least? It's not. Which appears to confine objects to one-dimensional world lines in which their state transition events are separated by intervening segments. Okay, because it's like it's kind of reifying linear time. Okay, maybe that's why. But then it such that each previous event is determined by the former ones, even though he did say something against that up here. But that makes sense. He says it's not attached to Markovianism, and Markovianism being a present state not being as determined by previous states or determined at all. Okay, give me 1 second. I'm gonna let my cat inside, and then I'm gonna pick up super tautology.
I presume this will be edited out.
Inside my room, that is. Otherwise, you might hear very slight scratching of my door. Anyways, all right, super tautology. Truth, a predicate representing inclusion in a domain, is the logical property of virtue of which one thing may be identified and distinguished from another. Oh my god, my cat is being super annoying right now. Oh well, what are you gonna do? Is the logical property by virtue of which one thing may be identified and distinguished from another at any level of resolution. All theories aim at truth, and reality theory is no exception. With respect to science, there is a problem with truth. Beyond the level of direct observation, it cannot be certified by empirical means. To blame are various forms of uncertainty, model theoretic ambiguity, and the problem of induction. Scientific generalizations are circular insofar as they are necessarily based on the assumption that nature is uniform. The problem of induction effectively limits certitude to mathematical reasoning. Okay. This is hardly surprising. She jumped on my lap. Okay. Now she'll shut up. For truth is ultimately a mathematical concept. In logic, truth is defined by means of always true expressions called tautologies. And a tautology, once again, is something that is always true, the opposite of a contradiction, which is always false. A logical tautology possess three distinctive properties. It is descriptively universal. It is closed under recursive self-composition. So that's kind of the reason that well, this and the next one are the reasons why people, I think it's a very lukewarm thing to say, but that people kind of diminutively refer to tautology as just saying the same thing twice. But again, like I said in a tweet, there's a deeper beauty to tautology for sure. Which is funny because you know, a lot of more simply minded people, in being more simple minded, they do kind of get some nuggets of wisdom. They don't obfuscate things to themselves. So, it is what it is, kind of, is a tautology. Anyhow, uh, kind of a tautology. And it is internally and externally consistent on the syntactic and semantic levels of reference. Let's see. One second. Cat crawled on my desk. Can't have that. Okay.
I don't know, are you petting the cat? I don't know, perhaps it's a pet store.
She was on my lap, and then unfortunately my lap is right by my desk, and she's a very exploratory feline creature. So let's see. Since logic is the theory of truth, the way to construct a fully verifiable theory is to start with logic and develop the theory by means of rules or principles under which truth is heritable. Because truth is synonymous with logical tautology, this means developing the theory by adjoining rules which themselves have a tautological structure, i.e., which are universal, closed, and consistent, and logically extracting the implications. A theory of reality constructed in this way is called a supertautology. And the way I like to think of supertautology, well, obviously he's getting at it kind of being composed of tautologies, more primary tautologies that extend themselves to more uh, deeper levels of tautology. Like, as for instance, if you have like a definition of God as like absolute, um, or you define like the absolute is that which has no privation or gradation. Even a definition that kind of recursively defines itself is kind of a tautology as well. You can take a lot of things like that, especially if you already have kind of provided the groundwork for why there needs to be an absolute reality principle. As for instance, everything needing to be situated in the context of that. So, mind, or at least some kind of mentalizing property. You don't actually necessitate mind exactly from that. You would extend it to necessitating mind, in my opinion, but you would have to necessitate a mentalizing and a physicalizing property, but both of those would be situated and contextualized according to the reality principle. So even if like materialists were correct and mind is kind of an illusion, you would just define the mentalizing property according to that. And likewise with the opposite, if idealism is totally absolutely correct, then you would situate the physicalizing property totally in the context of idealism, which is what I do radically. And I think you have to do radically with idealism. Otherwise, it doesn't really make sense. It's kind of lip service. But also with super tautology, I like to think of it as a larger scale. So for instance, you can have tautologies that don't actually have bearing on reality, but they're still true according to the context in which you constructed the tautology. And I have a video on this. I believe it's called Are Tautologies Valid? Or something like that. Where I get into this issue, because if you have a tautology about like a unicorn and the context is like some fantasy book, think of whatever tautology. Uh, Perhaps in the fantasy world of Glibble unicorns are creatures, equine creatures, equestrian creatures with one horn, unicorn, unicornu, so that's a tautology, or anything with one horn. But it's not, it doesn't have any bearing on our reality, but within the context it's constructed, it is true. But I like to think of a super tautology. I don't think it's exactly what he's getting at, but as something that is true at the highest scale. So it's the context is reality itself. And if you were to disprove the the position, the statement, what's being predicated, you would be disproving the tautological status of that position. So it's not that tautology would be invalidated. It's just that it would be pointed out that the position is not actually tautological. Anyways, a little bit of extra context there. A little bit tangential, but I think that might be valuable. In a supertautological theory of reality, it is unnecessary to assume the uniformity of nature with respect to certain kinds of generalization. Instead, such generalizations can be mathematically deduced, e.g., nomological covariance, the invariance of the rate of global self-processing, C invariance, and the internally apparent accelerating expansion of the system. And I'll read, let me see. That was kind of a short one. This one's, yeah, I'll read like 2 paragraphs of this, and then we'll go back to you, Mal, and I'll pick up with that, because this was kind of a short one, but okay. I'll just read to here. And test, you guys still have me, right? Gotta do tests these days.
Nah, you're gone. You're
Gone,
you're
okay.
100% gone, of course.
Okay. Reduction and extension. The greatest theoretical advances have typically been associated with 2 complementary processes, reduction and extension. The conceptual components of a theory are reduced to more fundamental components, and the theory extended by the emergence of new and more general relationships among them. Okay, let's reread that part. Specifically, the conceptual components of a theory are reduced to the more fundamental components. Okay, that makes sense. And the theory extended by the emergence of new and more general relationships among them. Right. So if you have like a tautology, it should be able to, for one, smaller like micro theories should be able to fit into that macro theory, right? And it should be able to situate those accordingly and extend to any new ones. So if you had like a perfect reality theory, it would be able to situate, let's say, like general relativity exactly according to its truth in reality. All these other things, quantum mechanics, um, and anything new that arises. All right, pretty straightforward. CTMU reduces reality to self-transducing information and ultimately telesis. I like to say telesis, but Chris pronounces it as telesis, so we're going to go with telesis. Using the closed reflexive syntactic structure of the former as a template for reality theory. So self-transducing information, ultimately telesis, that's kind of seems to be the process that tellers undergo. Although there's also unbound telesis, and I believe we'll get into that a little later. So I'll do this paragraph as well. In science, everything requires an explanation, even explanations. Not only do observations demand explanatory theories, but theories require explanations of their own. Unfortunately, it is sometimes forgotten that until something has been explained in an explicable way, it has not been properly explained at all. If a theory is not self-explanatory, then it must be reduced to a more fundamental theory that explains it. Otherwise, it merely relies on assumptions. Yeah, a lot of science kind of well, a lot of the positions of like mainstream scientists are they're totally satisfied with observations and just kind of retrofitting a theory that happens to work for them. And I believe I talked about this in the last. I'm very late in uploading the videos, but I will do that. That that oh no, yeah, no, in the last official video, my effort post, not the reading group video, that yes, I have a cat playing with a fake mouse right underneath me. That basically a lot of math just kind of tries to approximate itself to the truth, but the fact that it is approximating itself to reality more concisely than another theory, and the fact that theories can be replaced does point to some kind of metastructural reality that they're getting at. But yeah,
Another pure math victory, as
right,
always.
pure math victory. All
Yeah,
right.
the only real subject. We abolish everything else. Everyone will be forced to learn pure math. Everyone will be forced to go through all things. You want to do some more, calculus with kinematics. That will be wonderful.
All right. All you.
Let's continue. Um, e.g., consider an explanation to the effect that birds can fly because they have wings. Without an explanation of atmospheric resistance, this explanation is incomplete. It contains no explanation of why or how wings enable flight, merely relying on the assumption that they do. Therefore, while it is true as far as it goes, it leaves out crucial supporting knowledge and cannot stand alone. Concisely, every theory I plus 1 that is not self-explanatory must be reduced to a more fundamental theory Ti. I think Ti plus 1, yeah, Ti. That explains the theory and supports it, so that Ti follows that that Ti causes Ti plus 1 or infers Ti plus 1 to exist. And this explanatory regress can only end with the self-explanatory theory or theory T0. Which this sounds a lot like mathematical induction. If anyone has done that, where you have P0 and then you continue on to that to prove the statement. The fact is very frequently forgotten in evolutionary biology, where e.g., details of molecular structure and dynamics are used to explain organic phenomena. Although these details come from the more fundamental theories of quantum chemistry and physics, they will never constitute a satisfactory explanation of life until they incorporate not only an explanation of physics and chemistry, but reality at large. This is true because physical observable reality is not a complete model for physics, and thus is not self-contained with respect to explanation. In this sense, any exclusively materialistic interpretation of physical theory is prima facie absurd, and because physics is not non-self-explanatory theory regardless of model, to explain organic phenomena, why am I making it on? Phenomena using natural selection, one needs an explanation for natural selection. Using natural selection, one needs an explanation for natural selection, including the natural selection of the laws of physics and the universe as a whole. Theoretical reduction involves regressive unbinding of progressive informational constants in order to achieve increasingly basic explanations. Closed theoretical signatures are ripped open and reduced to more basic concepts that can be reformed into more basic and expressive signatures. However, the informational part of the regress terminates where further reduction would compromise intelligibility. There can be no further reductive regress through increasingly fundamental theoretic strata once the requirement of regression, reduction, theorization, and stratification have themselves been lost. Beyond this point, infocognition gives way to informational and cognitive potential, or telesis. The process of reducing distinctions to the homogeneous syntactic media that supports them is synodiphonic regression. This process involves unisection, whereby the rules of structures and dynamics that respectively govern a set of distinctive objects. Where was I? That's my bad. Their distinct objects are reduced to syntactic dynamics respect to governments as distinct objects are reduced to a syntactic join in an infocognitive lattice of syntactic media. Unisection is a general form of reduction which implies that all properties realized within a medium are properties of the medium itself. Did I jump over something now, or am I good? And also, am I still in the
I believe
fold?
you're
Yes,
good.
I
I
am.
believe you're
That's
good.
good. All right. Where emergent properties are merely latent properties of telesyntactic medium of emergence. The mysteries of emergent phenomena are reduced to just two. How are emergent properties anticipated in the syntactic structure of the medium of emergence, and why are they not expressed except under specific conditions, e.g., degree of systemic complexity? I think. Next section is long. I'll force myself and steal a paragraph from your section. The principle of infocognitive monism. Where language consists of information and information has linguistic structure, the principle of linguistic reducibility implies that information is as fundamental as language. Information is as fundamental as language insofar as we cannot understand reality except in theoretical, linguistic, and informational terms. This permits us to cast a reality as a self-processing language, or self-defining, self-explaining, self-modulating theory, universe, ensemble, without fear of being proven wrong by some alternate theoretical reduction. However, the linguistic reduction of reality is superficially macroscopic, just as perfectly self-contained language must be self-processing for lack of anything external to process it. So must the information in which it consists. This leads to concept of self-processing information and ultimately to microscopic quantum theory of information.
All right. It is easy to show that information is self-processing. Structure is attributive. The parts of any structure possess attributes that position them or otherwise define them relative to other parts. To be meaningful and thus informative, information must have structure. Therefore, information must possess attributes. Attributive relationships, intrinsic or otherwise, must conform to the logical rules that govern attribution, i.e., to an attributive logical syntax incorporating the propositional and predicate calculi. So information can exist only in conjunction with attributive logical syntax. Because it necessarily incorporates attributive syntax, it has enough native self-processing capacity to maintain its intrinsic structure, which is precisely what it must do to qualify as informational. Because cognition and generic information transduction are identical up to isomorphism, after all, cognition is just the specific form of information processing that occurs in a mind. Information processing can be described as generalized cognition. Okay. And the coincidence of information and processor can be referred to as infocognition. Reality thus consists of a single substance, infocognition, with two aspects corresponding to transduction and being transduced. So, cognition, I'm assuming, would be the operation of being transduced, and information would, I think, be by default transduction. Describing reality as infocognition thus amounts to infocognitive dual aspect monism, where infocognition equals the distributed generalized self-perception and self-cognition of reality. Infocognitive monism implies a stratified form of panpsychism, in which at least three levels of self-cognition can be distinguished with respect to scope, power, and coherence, global, agentive, and subordinate. So, yes, I do think Langan's CTMU does err more on panpsychism than panenpsychism, because the information of objects, although it would be totally mental, is kind of given an ontological status. I would probably err on panenpsychism. This is probably where he would definitely take a point of departure, or at least I'm thinking, to my mind, from a more strict apophatic Neoplatonism, which I kind of agree with Chris here, because the primary reality principle, instead of being the hyparxis, the apophatic hyparxis of the one, would be basically a divine mind, probably a little closer to Hermeticism. But in any case, ultimately, the conceptual shift from information to self-transducing information requires extensions of information-intensive theories, including the theories of information, computation, and cybernetics. The problem stems from the fact that, as it is understood in these fields, information is a limited concept based on an engineering model in which the existence of senders, receivers, messages, channels, and transmissive media are already conveniently given, complete with all of the structural and dynamical laws required to make them work together. Moreover, the bit structure specified in this model relates to the actual structure of information, the way propositional logic relates to logic as a whole, including the predicate calculus and model theory. To wit, only a single level of structure and functionality is considered, and attribution is primarily limited to just a pair of central predicates common to both theories. True false equals 1 0. So kind of a binary, which seems to obviously refer to John Wheeler's It from Bit, which I believe he already explained, but he might get into more. Anyways, just as sentential logic concerns itself only with the functorial relationships of sentential variables and ignores their content, information theory concerns itself only with the probabilities of symbols in message strings and ignores the details of syntactic and semantic structure and processing. Okay, let's see. Diagram 12. Sentential logic and information theory both ignore entire levels of structure in order to reduce the universe to ones and zeros. In sentential logic, sentential variables are distinguished only by whether they are true or false, 1 or 0. While the standard theory of information, along with the theories of computation and cybernetics, deals with raw data, expressed or encoded, in the most basic possible terms, namely the binary digits 1 and 0. While the role of these bits is to reduce uncertainty regarding specific items of content, certain essential details of syntactic and semantic structure and processing, and more specific relationships among variables and data are conveniently omitted. The red question marks indicate that neither sentential logic nor information theory fully explains itself, its model, or its medium. The diagram partially adapted from A Mathematical Theory of Communication from the Bell System Technical Journal. Okay. So these are the variables that are unexplained. Okay. So I think this is basically just a critique. Information source, the transmitter, noise, receiver, destination, but a bunch of unexplained variables. Okay. So, however, the most interesting part of the analogy, actually, let's rewind a bit. Mal, if you have any insights on this, feel free to chime in. But if not, that's totally fine. I think it's relatively straightforward because he's kind of just critiquing its lack of explanation.
I think so. I think. Oh, okay, my light went out. I need to fix that now. God, it smells so much. I don't really think it's a lot of math. Like some of these like point to each other symbols and all. I don't have ever seen V used that way, where it's like 1v0 and it's either 1 over 0. I don't think really any of this is very mathy in its structure.
Okay.
Like the other point says, is it like V, like upside down, back, forward? Like it's. I don't think that's math symbols, at least as far as I've been using them.
Okay. Cool. However, the most interesting part of the analogy is its logical extension. Just as sentential logic is naturally extended to encompass the levels of attribution associated with predicate logic and model theory, the theory of information can be naturally extended to encompass deeper levels of attribution. In fact, the same two levels adjoined to sentential logic. Retooling the information concept consists of 3 steps. First, it must be equipped with the means of its own transduction or transformative processing, where information transduction is cognitively recognized as generalized cognition. This amounts to replacing it with a dual aspect quantum of reflexivity, infocognition, which relies on or which embodies telic feedback. Second, its bit structure, a simplistic and rather uninspired blend of two-valued propositional logic and probability theory, must be extended to accommodate logic as a whole, including 1. Predicate logic, 2. Model theory, and 3. Language theory, broadly including the theories of mathematical languages, metalanguages, and generative grammars. After all, since information does nothing but attribute linguistically organized predicates to objects in the context of models, Its meaning involves the mathematics of predicates, languages, and models. And third, it must be generalized to an ultimate ancestral medium, telesis, from which infocognitive syntax and its informational content arise by specificative, silly me, feedback as part of a unified complex, a recursive coupling of information and meta-information or transductive syntax. This retooling is accomplished by associating language or information with reflexive syntactic operators, units of coherent infocognition, and a reflexive linguistic structure, self-configuring, self-processing language, SCSPL, that incorporates its own model and is thus identical to its universe. SCSPL evolves by conspansion, which is material contraction qua spatial expansion, a structured grammatical alternation between a linguistic output phase, classical reality, consisting of the observable states or external relationships of syntactic operators, and a production phase that transforms one state to another. This being said, there is a sense in which infocognitive monism well agrees with the telesis that bits are universal descriptors of reality. Because the bit values 1 and 0 are analogous to the truth values of two-valued logic, the fact that perceptual reality is described by two-valued logic implies that it can be described in terms of bits. However, while reality at large is defined by relevance to perceptual reality in the relativistic sense, it does not consist of perceptual reality alone. Okay. All right. Interesting.
The next section is fairly big, so we could also split it in half.
All right,
each
so
one.
let's take a look. All right, so how about you go ahead and read to this first paragraph of the next page, and at zero constraint, I'll pick up here. And yeah, go ahead.
All right. Telic reducibility and telic recursion. Telic recursion is a fundamental process that tends to maximize cosmic selection parameter, generalized utility over a set of possible syntax state relationships in light of the self-configurative freedom of the universe. An inherently quantum process that reflects the place of quantum theory in SCCPL. Telic recursion is a pre-informational form of recursion involving a combination of holology, telic feedback, recursive selection, acting on the informational potential of mu, a primal syntophonetic form that is symmetric with respect to containment. What's SCCPL?
SCSPL, yeah, so that's the self-configuring, self-processing language.
You cut
Basically,
out
how
of
we,
self-configuring.
yeah.
I just heard self-configuring. It sounded like self-configuring SPL. What's SPL?
Oh, so SPL would be self-processing language. So I'm assuming,
Self-processing language,
yeah, so he
right?
reduces that to
Because you,
reality itself. So it configures
yeah,
itself and processes itself in kind of a
yeah.
lingual form.
Yeah. Where perceptual reality consists of infocognition, self-traducing information, explaining the genesis and evolution of reality amounts to explaining the genesis and evolution of infocognition. Because generalized cognition, informational processing, is temporal. While information locates objects or message units in attributive spaces, information and cognition are respectively spatial and temporal in nature. Infocognition is analogous to spacetime, and spacetime is infocognitive. It follows that perceptual reality consists not merely of infocognition but of spacetime, and that seeking an explanation of the genus the genesis, not genus, this is not Aristotle. The genesis and evolution of reality amounts to seeking an explanation of the genesis and evolution of space-time qua infocognition, i.e., to cosmology in the context of information transduction.
I'm gonna chime in real quick.
Cos-
So infocognition as analogous to
you're cutting out
space-time.
again.
Oh, am I cutting out? Am I good? Is this
Well, I don't know. I hear like info and then it like a cut out and word.
metanoia? Am I cutting out to you, or maybe I was just
Just a tiny bit, but I think you're good.
is it a little better now?
Yes, you're good.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Let me know if it continues. I'll see if something's up with this. But yeah, so analogous to space-time because, well, the process of cognition is in fact a process, so it does have to involve time. Um, space. What I'm getting from this is that because space relays information, that's why it's analogous. Uh, like objects are relative in space. Space kind of registers and renders the relationship of information with, or let's say a specific instance of information with other instances. And time, well, time actually renders the process of its evolution, right? So good little bit there. So go ahead, Mal.
All right. Let's see. I'm getting distracted by my candle. Apologies. For context. Is it what did I just finish the first one or second paragraph? I think it was the
You
second
finished the
paragraph.
second one, so you're starting at cosmology.
All right. I need to stop focusing on my candle. It's very distracting. Cosmology. Humanity's grand attempt to explain the origin and nature of the universe has traditionally amounted to the search for a set of ultimate laws capable of explaining not only how the universe currently functions, but how it came to be. Unfortunately, even were such set of laws to be found, the associated explanation could not be considered adequate until the laws themselves were explained, along with the fundamental objects and attributes on which they act. This gives rise to what seems like an imponderable question. How can a set of laws, objects, and attributes be explained except by invoking another set of laws in form of an explanatory syntax that would itself demand an explanation, and so ad infinitum? The answer is hiding in the question. The hiding laws do not stand on their own, but must be defined with respect to the objects and attributes on which they act, which they accept as parameters. Similarly, objects and attributes do not stand on their own, but must be defined with respect to rules of structure, organization, transformation that govern them. It follows that the active medium of definition possesses logical primacy over laws and arguments alike, and is thus pre-informational and pre-numerological in nature, i.e., telic. Telesis, which can be characterized as infocognitive potential, is the primordial active medium from which laws and their arguments and parameters emerge by mutual refinement or telic recursion. In other words, telesis, one of the words, I forgot which one Langan preferred, is a kind of pre-space-time from which time and space cognition and information state transitional syntax and state have not yet emerged. Once bound in a primitive infocognitive form that drives potential by generating relievable stress between its generalized spatial and temporal components, i.e., between state and transition syntax. Telesis continues to be refined into a new infocognitive configurations, i.e., new states and new arrangements of state transition syntax in order to relieve the stress between syntax and state through telic recursion, which it can never do owing to the contingencies inevitably resulting from independent telic recursion on the parts of localized subsystems, as far as concerns the primitive telic recursive infocognitive mu form itself. it does not emerge at all except intrinsically. It has no external existent except as one of the myriad possibilities that naturally exist in an unbounded realm of zero constraint.
Okay. I'll pick up there. I do want to kind of comment on this. So yeah, so he's getting a little closer to a kind of a principle that substantiates itself in this kind of process function. But if you have an operation, you do need to explain it in terms that aren't the operation itself. So if you have this kind of infocognitive operation, it stands to reason that you have that it is just the intrinsic function of something else. So we're getting a little closer to a metastructure here, or a reality principle in the sense that I use the term. Yeah. So a little closer to kind of like an empty mind that isn't, cogitating or cognizing or mentalizing. All right, so kind of like what your mind would be in itself without its operation, although the operation would exist intrinsically to the mind prior to its operation. So, good stuff. Okay. Telic recursion occurs in two stages: primary and secondary. Primary being global, secondary local. In the primary stage, universal distributed laws are formed in juxtaposition with the initial distribution of matter and energy, while the secondary stage consists of material and geometric state transitions expressed in terms of the primary stage. That is where universal laws are syntactic and the initial mass energy distribution is the initial state of spacetime. Secondary transitions are derived from the initial state by rules of syntax, including the laws of physics plus telic recursion. The primary stage is associated with the global teller, reality as a whole, which Chris would probably describe as isomorphic with his conception of the global operator descriptor or God. The secondary stage with internal tellers, agent level observer participants. Because there is a sense in which primary and secondary telic recursion can be regarded as simultaneous, local tellers can be said to constantly create the universe by channeling and actualizing generalized utility within it. So I will be, like I've said a couple of times, I do kind of like to cast my own understanding back onto things, because it might be helpful. It's definitely helpful for me. Might be helpful for a viewer. Okay, so if you have local, there's actually a couple things I want to go over. If you have like these local tellers, which are basically souls, they would kind of be individuations of the primary or global teller. And what would distinct them, in my view, would be the souls are inhabiting conditions, i.e., they have particular states. The bare teller itself might be isomorphic with the primary or the global teller. So, in terms of souls and minds, the mind in itself of you, the individual viewer or listener, would be isomorphic with that of God, but you are that primary mind inhabiting a condition, hence individuated. So you're not God, in a sense, because in order to actually have like the agency, that primary universal agency, you would have to not be inhabiting a particular state, right? Your state is a kind of a constraint. What else? Right. So the soul is kind of defined by information, or the secondary tellers are defined by informational constraints, kind of. And they are, of course, contained by the global. And in fact, if you kind of add them all up, you'll have kind of this image of that metastructure that is kind of getting at in the previous, or being gotten to in the previous paragraph, which has zero constraint. But even that wouldn't be the mind in itself. Like if you had the totality of all things, it wouldn't actually be the underlying unity. It would just be, the whole image thereof. But yeah, so tellers would kind of create the universe as they undergo their process of telic recursion and infocognition, because they are creating new states relating to other states. So I think CTMU would actually probably be would probably offer a coherent groundwork for things like mental causal power. But the stipulation there would be that causality is like rendered as, in a material format in a, in a lot of ways. If you take like idealism, which infocognitive monism kind of like idealism, if not just basically a different articulation thereof, then, so take idealism, materiality wouldn't just be nothing, right? It would be like the way that the ideal nature operates, or at least renders its operation to itself. So, yes, you'd have mental causality, but it would often be, well, if you have any causality at all, it'd have to be rendered in space time or materially. All right, continuing on from there. Diagram 13. The above diagram illustrates the relationship of primary and secondary telic recursion, with the latter embedded in or expressed in terms of the former. Let me reread that. Illustrates the relationship of primary and secondary telic recursion, with the latter embedded in and expressed in terms of the former. Okay, so I'm assuming, yeah, this is the embedded in, the secondary embedded in this primary. I like how the dot's in the middle. You kind of have that monad symbol, but the dot would also be relative to the bigger circle as well, but also the smaller circle. So taking what I just said, this could be this circle around the dot, this smaller one around the dot could be kind of the constraint. And of course the feedback, configuring the state. Anyways, the large circles and arrows represent universal laws, distributed syntax engaged in telic feedback with the initial state of spacetime, initial mass energy distribution. Okay, one other thing I wanted to say was you could kind of get the idea that laws, like laws of physics, whatever, laws of nature, are arbitrary, but he did kind of clarify that they arise out of like an intrinsic self-reference to the metastructure. He doesn't use the word metastructure yet, at least. I know he uses the word metastructure somewhere, but it would be that those laws aren't like fundamental in themselves, but they would kind of be intrinsically referencing the nature of that metastructure. So it wouldn't be completely arbitrary. But anyways, or at least that's what I'm getting from this. While the small circles and arrows represent telic feedback between localized contingent aspects of syntax and state via conspansion. The primary stage maximizes global generalized utility on an ad hoc basis as local tellers freely and independently maximize their local utility functions. The primary stage counterparts of inner expansion and requantization are called coinversion and incoversion. It is by virtue of telic recursion that the SCSPL universe can be described as its own self-simulative, self-actualizative quantum proto-computer. So reality as an operation, as a self-simulation, does make perfect sense. So this actually gets to, or at least Chris's use of reality as a self-simulation gets at like a far more coherent, just better version of the kind of pop culture poisoned, nerd ridden simulation theory stuff. Well, yes, reality kind of is a simulation, but I mean, simulation theory doesn't really answer any questions because, for one, the object or really the simulation itself would have to still refer to metastructural laws and rules, even though obviously in a video game you can do things that you cannot do in reality. Nonetheless, the coding, so to speak, coheres with reality at large. And plus, you'd have to, after so many layers of potential simulation, what would be, you'd still have to get to primary reality at some point. So, just a little polemic against like digital type simulation theory. Anyways, not that that actually makes it impossible, but deterministic, computational, and continuum models of reality are recursive in the standard sense. They evolve by recurrent operations on state from a closed set of rules or laws. Because the laws are invariant and act deterministically on a state discrete array or continuum, there exists neither the room nor the means for optimization and no room for self-design. The CTMU, on the other hand, is conspansive and telic recursive, because new state potentials are constantly being created by evacuation and mutual absorption of coherent objects, syntactic operators. Through conspansion, metrical and nomological uncertainty prevail, wherever standard recursion is impaired by object sparsity. This amounts to self-generative freedom, hologically providing reality with a self-simulative scratchpad on which to compare the aggregate utility of multiple self-configurations for self-optimizative, some of these ones with Z's are a little weird, self-optimizative purposes. Standard recursion is Markovian, in that, when a recursive function is executed, each successive recursion is applied to the result of the preceding one. Okay. So, right. So not referencing the past. Each present state is the specific frame of reference for the future state. Telic recursion is more than Markovian. Itself actualizatively coordinates events in light of higher order relationships, or telons. Remember, those are the objects of subscription for tellers, that are invariant with respect to overall identity, but may display some degree of polymorphism on lower orders. Actually reminds me of, if you have like more universal states, they would kind of be polymorphic with more particular states that they contain, which would be, not isomorphic because they're more particular and probably, well, by virtue of being more particular, more composed with other states that aren't the exact universal state being referenced. But anyhow, once one of these relationships is nucleated by an opportunity for telic recursion, it can become an ingredient of syntax in one or more telic recursive, global or agent level operators or tellers, and can be carried outward by inner expansion, i.e., sustained within the operator as it engages in mutual absorption with other operators. Two features of conspansive spacetime, the atemporal homogeneity of IEDs, operator strata, and the possibility of extended superposition, then permit the telon to self-actualize by intelligently, i.e. telerecursively, coordinating events in such a way as to bring about its own emergence, subject to various more or less subtle restrictions involving available freedom, noise, and competitive interference with other telons. In any self-contained, self-determinative system, telic recursion is integral to the cosmic, teleobiological, and volitional levels of evolution. Now, before I continue on here, I just want to say that I think observing dreams is a really interesting way to kind of see how this kind of stuff works, especially, well, not only this and like this self-configuration aspect or underpinning here, also the bit binary query, so to speak, true or false. Because in dreams, you might notice, especially if you record your dreams, which we talked about a little bit in last week's casual chat, that you kind of do less than consciously, I'd almost describe it as super consciously, answer queries in your dream that self-configure like some of the radical changes in the dream. Like, for instance, in a single dream or in a single dream sequence, right? Before, dreams often are multi-sequenced, right? There's different sequences, and they all seem coherent. But before we get to that, in a single sequence, something a really important detail might just change, and you treat it as totally coherent, right? So, kind of a reconfiguration there. And likewise, the following sequences might seem totally coherent, or you don't even realize that a sequence has passed unless you're having a lucid dream. Even then, you might not. Your consciousness is a little different. So a dream could be maybe taken to be more the agent kind of interacting with its own state and syntax, the syntax between, because a lower order agent doesn't just have one state. It does, but it's composed of a bigger complex of information. And there's a syntax there too between all of those instances of information. So I would think of a dream as kind of a more immediate immersion in that state in its syntax and kind of a playing around with it that you do super consciously. So a little bit of homework I'd like to give is having everybody, or at least me encouraging all of you, even the viewers, to record some dreams and see if that makes sense to you. At least that's something I've noticed. Record some dreams. It's probably good to have a better apprehension and grasp on your own mind, anyways. So, before we continue on. Okay, so this is kind of a big one. Why don't, Mal, you just read the first page and go ahead and take this paragraph to its conclusion onto the second page, and then I'll pick up from there. Or you can do this paragraph as well, actually. Well, I'll let you choose. You can go up to this or the one before.
I'll do the long one.
All right.
This will probably be a large section, as I think, right?
Kind of. It's a 2-page section. And then we're getting, I like to skip ahead. Some of these will be much bigger sections, but that's okay. We'll get there.
All right. The Telic principle, restricted to the teleological Y level of explanation. Map yields the Telic principle. The universe configures itself according to the requirement that itself select from a background of undifferentiated ontological potential or telesis. This requirement amounting to a need for self-actualization and self-expression is implicit in the mu form. The Telic principle is responsible for converting potential to actuality in such a way as to maximize a universe self-selection parameter, generalized utility. Theology, not to be mixed up with teleology.
Yeah.
What was I saying? Theology. Oh, that's
Theology.
the other. Okay, teleology, the idea that the universe has purpose which explains its existence and guides its evolution, some time ago began losing weight to in the court of scientific opinion, although it was first assumed that a more neutral, less theological explanation for the existence of man and the universe would come along to fill the resulting explanatory void. It eventually became evident that no such replacement was conveniently falling out of the equations. Some amount of higher level interpretation would be required in any case. This marked the rise of the so-called anthropic principle, which now comes in several flavors, including weak, strong, final, and that favored by Wheeler, participatory. The initial weak version, the weak anthropic principle, or WAP, began with the trivial, if somewhat Bayesian point that our cosmological observations of the universe reveal a capacity for life, because a life-bearing universe is the only kind of universe in which there are living beings able to make cosmological observations. But while this seems to imply that there exists a domain of many universes in which such a universe can be passively distinguished by the circumstantial constraint that it contains living observers, the WAP offers no ready explanation for such a domain. Indeed, to those not convinced of its virtues, the WAP almost seems to add an unnecessary dose of explanatory red ink to the cosmological ledger. The strong anthropic principle, SAP, eliminates much of this red ink by making a more extreme claim, asserting that the existence of intelligent life is not just a circumstantial selection principle, but sine qua non of cosmic existence. In effect, this limits the set of possible universes to just those which are capable of producing life. However, this leads to problems. How can the idea that living observers are necessary for the existence of the universe be squared with the idea that objective reality is essentially independent of observation on those who observe it? And how does intelligent life, which seems to have evolved billions of years after the universe was born, play any kind of causal role in cosmology? In some sort of time travel occurring, selection is one thing, retroactive self generation is quite another. It has been remarked that the anthropic principle employs circular reasoning, i.e., they seem to take that which they purport to explain, the observable fact that the universe is fine tuned to support life, as a premise, asserting that living beings observe the universe to be friendly to life because life is present in the universe to make this observation. In other words, we are here to observe the universe, and the universe is here to let us observe it because we are here to observe the universe. Unfortunately, the anthropic principles lack something that they would need to make this work: a circular model to which their loop-like reasoning can be consistently mapped. Quite simply, the type of causal circularity they suggest is at odds with the era of time and other aspects of the prevailing circular modes of time and space. Because circular arguments are self justifying and resistant to falsification, it is frequently assumed that tautology and circular reasoning are absolute theoretical evils, but this is far from the case, for logic and mathematics are almost completely based on circularity. Logical tautology, recursion and iteration, algebraic and topological closure, all involve it to some degree. The problems arise only when circular reasoning is employed without the assurance of full mathematical generality, incorporating false claims of universality on what may be non-universal premises.
All right, that actually perfectly gets at the concept I was talking about earlier with how a tautology can be employed in like a fantasy setting. You can make tautological statements about unicorns and goblins, even though those things are real. No, just kidding. Well, maybe, but
I don't know. Your unicorn definition would probably fit a rhinoceros.
it would actually. Well, actually, they kind of have two, don't they? Have like a secondary? No, no. I'm thinking of like some.
I don't know if they have to be like have some sort of what do you call it? Pels. I forgot what that is. Like the fur thing. Yeah, fur. Yeah,
Yeah,
fur thing. Fur. That word.
yeah,
Like then you could just say the woolly rhinoceros was a true
Like
unicorn.
a
yeah,
mane,
yeah,
like
yeah.
a mane.
I was thinking that. Yeah, yeah. Those were unicorns. Actually, we have unicorns. Yeah. Um, or at least there used to be. Kind of. I mean, yeah, one-horned animals. But so yeah, so he's getting to okay, problems arise only when circular reasoning is employed without the assurance of full mathematical generality. So when it's not a universal tautology. And like I said, if you were to disprove a position, a universal theory or position that predicated itself as a tautology, you would be undermining it as a tautology, so not invalidating tautology. So this is a really good explanation for that. So if you were to use tautology at the universal scale of like the gestalt of reality, then it would be completely valid. And in fact, it would extend itself. Well, everything would be reducible to it, like Langan said just earlier, just above, and it would extend itself to all particulars and other tautologies. So, all right, I'll pick up here. Unfortunately, not even valid tautologies are embraced by the prevailing school of scientific philosophy, falsificationism. While non-universal tautologies are rightly forbidden due to their resistance to falsificative procedures that would reveal their limitations, universal tautologies are pronounced scientifically uninteresting for much the same reason. But in fact, science could exist in no way, shape, or form without them. The very possibility of a scientific observation is utterly dependent on the existence of tautological forms on which to base a stable, invariant syntax of perception. This raises the possibility of falsificationist thinking that falsificationist thinking has accidentally obscured the true place of tautological reasoning in cosmology. This whole thing, these 2 paragraphs, should be made into like an Instagram post or something. Important stuff. Even though tautology is not like a widely known thing, but I get like logic nerds get big gripes with me for my use of tautology. But in any case, that's a very good it's a very good thing. However, I would say, I mean, even a non-universal tautology is strictly true according to its context. Like any statement you make about a unicorn in its context, so long as it's not contextualizing it in an instance where it is not true, it's a true thing. Like if you have like this if I'm talking about the Elder Scrolls and I don't know, I make a statement about high elves or something and I construct a tautology about them, it is true, completely true in the context of the fantasy of the Elder Scrolls, which, because many worlds theory is correct, is actually another world. But so it actually is true universally, just not in this world. But no, I'm just kidding. But yeah, that's a good point. Anyways, if the universe is really circular enough to support some form of anthropic argument, its circularity must be defined and built into its structure in a logical and therefore universal and necessary way. The Telek principle simply asserts that this is the case. The most fundamental imperative of reality is such as to force on it a super-tautological conspansive structure. The universe self-selects from unbound telesis, or UBT, a realm of zero information and unlimited ontological potential by means of Telek recursion, whereby infocognitive syntax and its informational content are cross-refined through Telek syntax state feedback over the entire range of potential syntax state relationships, up to and including all of space-time and reality in general. So UBT, I mean, the first thing it reminds me of is the indefinite dyad, but it might actually be getting closer to the one prior to both the monad and the dyad, because it's not like just this pure indefinite principle. It's just the zero constraint principle, zero informational constraint. So, like a mind, just by analogy, like a mind prior to inhabiting a condition of information. Say, take your mind, but you're not actually you. In fact, you're nothing. You're no condition, but there's still that meta structure of the mind, so it wouldn't quite be indefinite dyad. But some of the descriptions here do definitely bring that to mind. So he does definitely get to a more primary reality principle that's more apophatic, definitely not fully codiphotic, which would be like a more strict panpsychism would be like pure, or at least idealistic codiphoticism, right? Where everything is mind. Kind of like how you see some of the, we'll say, neo-Parmenideans on Twitter. They kind of take a little more of that route, although they don't like, their priority isn't mind, but it's similar to that. Anyways, I digress. The telic principle differs from anthropic principles in several important ways. First, it is accompanied by supporting principles and models which show that the universe possesses the necessary degree of circularity, particularly with respect to time. In particular, the extended superposition principle, a property of expansive spacetime that coherently relates widely separated events, lets the universe retrodite itself through meaningful cross-temporal feedback. Moreover, in order to function as a selection principle, it generates a generalized global selection parameter analogous to self-utility, which it then seeks to maximize in light of the evolutionary freedom of the cosmos as expressed through localized telic subsystems, which mirror the overall system in seeking to maximize local utility. In this respect, the telic principle is an ontological extension of the so-called principles of economy, like those of Maupertuis and Hamilton, regarding least action, replacing least action with deviation from generalized utility. Okay, interesting stuff here. So utility seems to be like, okay, so Chris obviously he uses the term self-definition and this and self-utility. Utility seems to be like the object of this kind of self-definition, like what it's trying to get at. It's trying to maximize utility. That's what it's seeking to define, at least processively. So if we take this neoplatonically, at least this is where my mind's going to, is that processively, not reversively, where you would be actually seeking the good in itself. Processively, you're seeking this utility that kind of mimics that reversive good. I actually need to write on this because I like this this concept of processive and reversive good. I'm not sure if anybody has written on that, but I did write on it. I haven't published it or anything, but yeah. So self utility as kind of this object, this objective of self definition, and least action with the least deviation from generalized utility. Kind of reminded me of inertia, but not quite. Although perhaps definitely related. The principle of inertia I've spoke to. I won't do it again. All right. In keeping with its clear teleological import, the telic principle is not without what might be described as theological ramifications. For example, certain properties of the reflexive, self-contained language of reality, that it is syntactically self-distributed, self-reading, and coherently self-configuring and self-processing, respectively correspond to the traditional theological properties omnipresence, omniscience, and omnipotence. Okay, hold on. Let's reread that. For example, certain properties of the reflexive, self-contained language of reality, that it is syntactically self-distributed, self-reading, coherently self-configuring, self-processing. Okay. Right, because it would have all of the power that is, especially on the global level. It would be present to all of the local instantiations. It wouldn't be diminished. Although I fail to recall if that explicitly has been elaborated on in this paper. And omniscience, all knowing, so knowing all of the information. These terms do get abused, which he's not doing here, obviously, but it does lend itself to some of the abuse of these terms, mostly by like atheists, right? Not by theists. It's kind of, I mean, it's like a straw man a lot of the time. Like all knowing doesn't necessarily have to be, for one, you could define it as not even knowing things that aren't right now, but knowing it in potential. All power doesn't have to extend to nonsense. Like, for instance, does God have the power to lift a rock that he can make? Can he make something he cannot lift? These things are just like nonsense statements.
I could just put there, if we have the absolute perfect footballer, would he be able to create a trick even he can't do? It's like you're
Right.
contradicting it by the self itself. If it's perfect, it does not have imperfect attributes. That doesn't really, prove anything. It's like, well, you see, you have a very nice perfect candle there, but can it, just break immediately, you know, or like, you have a very safe Bunsen burner. Will it just explode? You know, can it just spontaneously explode? It
Right,
can't, therefore
right.
it's not perfect, is it?
Self-refuting, yeah, exactly. And what that reminds me of, what you just said reminds me of, is the paradox of the, like, this statement is false, which apparently in ancient Greece caused a lot of duress to a lot of thinkers. I think someone killed themselves over it, but maybe Instagram lied to me. Wouldn't that be crazy? People posting
I don't have
misinformation.
Instagram. This is why I don't have Instagram.
Well, there you go. You're saving
And
yourself.
also, probably because I'm not as much of a physique build as you. That's my guess.
Yeah, that's true. Actually, I don't post physique. I post physique more in the server than I do on Instagram because I need you guys to see. Anyways, no, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Yeah. So this statement is false. It's just like a self-refuting. You can construct like nonsense statements. There's nothing prohibiting that from occurring. So, anyways, a little bit of a digression there, but while the kind of theology that this entails neither requires nor supports the intercession of any supernatural being external to the real universe itself, it does support the existence of a superphysical being, the SCSPL global operator designer. Okay, so designer, I do believe he uses descriptors sometimes, so that's God. You can see kind of the acronym, right? Superphysical being capable of bringing more to bear on localized physical context than meets the casual eye. Because the physical, directly observable part of reality is logically inadequate to explain its own genesis, maintenance, evolution, or consistency, it alone is incapable, or yeah, it alone is incapable of properly containing the being in question. All right. Well, there you go. Kind of getting at some apopaticism there. While I look at how long this is, good lord, I already see a bunch of problematic parts here. Not, content wise, but as far as reading it's concerned. If anybody has any comments or questions you can think of while I do that, go ahead and start cogitating because I'm going to take a little peek. All right, so, all right, that's a that's a 3-pager. This one is a 4-pager. Yeah, oh yeah. Oh yeah. All right. Getting into the weeds now. Well, all right. Does anybody have anything for what we have went over? I know some people joined. I'll give you guys a couple minutes. We can take a, well, not a couple minutes, a couple seconds here, so I can prepare for this mentally. If not, that's okay. Let's see. Okay, so the way we're gonna do this. I'm gonna have. Okay, so what we're gonna do, I'll have you, Mal. I'll have you. Wait. Okay, some background. All right. So this will probably just kind of go over some of what we already read. I'll have you go to here. Actually, yeah, I'll have you go to there because I might have. I'll probably pull you up for some of the other stuff too, but I'll try to read the bulk of what's past this for first page. If you're still interested in reading.
Yeah, so up till physics and mathematics, or past that section.
Yes, just go to laws of physics here.
Yeah, that's right, for physics and mathematics.
Yep.
Some background. A review of the standard computational theory or language. Computation theory recognizes two general types of automata, transducers and acceptors. Transducers convert input to output, while acceptors classify or recognize input consisting of strings of symbols without necessarily producing output. A finite transducer is a 5-tuple sigma q. Another Greek letter I don't know. Greek letter I don't know.
Lambda.
Greek letter I don't know.
Lambda delta. No, that's not delta. What is that?
That's not delta.
No, it's not delta. It's damn, this is embarrassing. I should know this. Oh well. And then
I got an excuse. I'm not a
Omicron.
Latinoid. Don't ask me about runes though.
We'll talk about that in the
I say such a
informal.
like. Where sigma is a finite non-empty input alphabet, q is a finite non-empty state. T with half of its top letter like thing. I'll just call it Fi, and I'll just not call it anything. I'll say Greek letter 1 is a finite non-empty output, Greek letter 2 relation to Q times sigma. My guess is that infers Q.
Oh wait, and that
Or
is
that
delta apparently. This is delta
no.
actually. It's
Wait,
lowercase
what is
delta.
delta?
D.
I never see lowercase delta, but that
Yeah.
makes sense
The
as well in
uppercase is the
physics because if you
triangle,
use
but
if you use a triangle, you immediately think change of state because that's how it's used in basically
right,
every
right.
single mathematical formula where it's present.
Oh, and this is
Um,
omega, not omicron or
well,
omicron.
is there a part whether he stops using these Greek letters because perhaps you want to do that and I'll just go down a bit further.
Yeah, you can just do the number system. It might be easier to refer to.
What do you mean number? Like,
Well,
shall I
you were
do
saying
it
the
or what's?
First Greek symbol.
Oh yeah, so we have the first Greek finite non-empty output alphabet. The second Greek letter times Q, which is times sigma, is I think that relation amounts to Q. I forgot what the arrow means in math. That's my guess that this infers this case to be true. It's the state or state transition function, and third Greek letter relation to Q times sigma uh, determines T. Well, the first letter. I'm trying to remember how arrows worked in math. I apologize if I'm embarrassing someone right now who's a math nerd. To this, we can add a start state Q0. Finite transducers ultimately rely on mechanical laws to function, transforming informational output to informational output by transforming their states. A finite acceptor is a 5-tuple Q sigma, the second Greek letter Q0A, where Q is a set where Q is a non-empty finite set of internal states. Sigma is an alphabet, Q0 is the start state, and A I lesser than. I mean, that's an equal sign, but I've never seen the U lay down. Right, that's a union sign in a very weird position. Times like these, I wish we had Kevin. Is a set of accepting states. The range of the transition mapping Greek letter number 2 determines the type of acceptor. It is deterministic if Greek letter number 2 in ratio to Q times sigma generates Q, and non-deterministically if second Greek letter Q times sigma creates 2Q, where 2Q represent 2 to the power Q, where 2 to the power Q represents the power set of possible states. A deterministic finite acceptor Q sigma for second Greek letter Q0A accepts a string X belongs to sigma if and only if second Greek letter brackets Q0 to X and bracket belongs to A. A language is the set of string accepted by a given automaton or class of automata. I apologize if my lack of knowledge of that weird U thing is interrupting understanding about it. Languages are generated by grammars. In the computational theory of language, a generative or phase structure grammar G is a 4-tuple NTP new Greek letter. I'm not going to name them anymore. Consisting of a finite set of n non-terminals, a finite non-empty set of terminals, with n intersect T equals Norwegian and n union T equal A, the total alphabet of the grammar. A finite set of productions P U laying down. You know what? For the sake of your understanding, I'm gonna quickly Google what that U laying down actually means.
Fair. Yeah, I think a
In
lot of this. Oh, you already have it up.
it's, it's subset,
Oh gosh. Okay.
subset, which means that it's a subset of this, right? Like if you have imagine a like a ball, and then you have a ball inside the ball. That ball inside the ball is a subset of the greater ball's volume.
Right on.
And a proper strict subset doesn't have at least one element, which is okay. This math has not been used yet. If we find it, I'll show it. So that weird laying you down thing was simply a subset of this. Now languages are generated with, let's see here, with P is a subset. Is it a subset or is it the other way? Let's see. Yes, P is a subset of, in brackets, N union T times, is my guess what that dot is meant to be, divide. Okay, that slash is very weird. T, well, that could mean something else. It's T, that all star divided by, well, that line is also weird. So T star times N union T star. I think that could be like derivative. No, that doesn't make sense. Something like that. I know it means something. I just forgot. It's consisting of non-terminal arguments and their possible terminal transformers, and for an element of Greek letter of n called starting symbol. The implementation of such a grammar is the deductive process leading from the general to the specific, starting from the more general symbol Greek letter, which stands for sentence. Increasingly specific productions lead to a terminal configuration. The production x, y, with bracket x, comma, y, and bracket, comma, often written x produces y, signifies replacement of x by y, or equivalently, the substitution of y for x, where a denotes the set of all strings or words in a, and a star. That's a very weird. That doesn't look like a division symbol, like that reverse slash. Anyone have any idea what that means in math?
No idea. I think we're missing
like
like a
almost
lot of context, maybe some pretty advanced math. It could also be like a specialized use. I'm wondering if Chris anywhere like elaborates some of the
a
equations that he.
right coset space is a set difference. In Wolfram mathematics, I wonder if you just expect, yeah, if you don't, you see, it's like Plato's Academy, but if he who does not know proper algebra shall not enter the gates. So yeah, you have to come with me and we'll learn fun calculus together. That's your only way to achieve enlightenment. A backslash T star denotes a complement of T star in A star. A word W belongs to A star backslash T star generates another word W. W derivative. I think that's W derivative. That's my guess because it looks like how I generally see derivative. W derivative if W equal to W1, X W2, W derivative equal X derivative. No, that means a common derivative. What's that? W2. But then what was that dot mean? I apologize for anyone listening. You'll just have to look at the document which is being shown on the screen if you want to actually understand. And X generates X little, what's that even called? Like little line, which makes me think it's a derivative. It's a production. The
Apostrophe.
theory of generative. What do you say?
I just said it's an apostrophe. Yeah.
The theory of generative grammar classifies them according to the least powerful acceptor that can recognize the language they generate. Type 0 grammar generates unrestricted languages requiring a universal computer Turing machine with an unlimited memory. Type 1 grammars generate context-sensitive language requiring a linear bounded automaton with memory proportional to word length. Type 2 grammar generates context-free language requiring a push-down automaton with memory stack in which fixed numbers of elements are available at any point. And Type 3 grammar generally generate regular language requiring a finite deterministic automaton with no memory. There is an obvious parallel between the state and state functions, the state transitions of automata, and the strings and productions of grammar. An automaton processes input strings through its internal states, expressing them in terms of its internal language. Indeed, a physical automaton is in the act of processing an input string can be seen as a dynamic linguistic stratification incorporating the input language. The mutable programming of the automaton includes assembly and machine code. Its hardwired architecture, the nomological language consisting of the laws of physics according to which the hardware functions, and any metaphysical level of language necessary to define and maintain the laws of physics themselves, since each language in this sequence is expressed in terms of the next one after it. The languages form a descriptive nesting in which the syntax of each distributes over all those preceding it. The syntax of a language consists of its grammar, the structure of its expressions. That syntax is a compilation of the spatial, structural, and temporal grammatical transformational rules of associated language. Its rules invariant, general, and distributive with respect to the entire set of expressions comprising the language. This concept is as meaningful for automata as it is for the languages they process, applying to every level of the linguistic stratification just described. For example, where the concept of general covariance expresses the general distributive nature of the laws of physics, these laws can be regarded as syntax unto themselves. And so can the more general mathematical laws applying to the various mathematical structures to which the laws of physics implicitly refer.
Yeah, so I'm thinking all of this stuff, as like if somebody wants to go through this at some point, or any viewer, these could be plugged into these, but it requires obviously being able to read the equations, and they're kind of complex. We might go ahead and revisit this at some point and actually take some time to figure out the algebraic language and plug them in, but we're not going to do that right now because it would just take way too long. But maybe in the future we'll go ahead and do that. Make it its own video, the math or the equations in the CTMU, something like that. However, touching on real quick is I would like to go over these. Type 0 grammars generate unrestricted languages requiring a universal computer and unlimited memory. And the reason I want to go over this is because it'll kind of give us an idea as to what he's positing with like language being fundamental to reality. So the fundamental level, it seems like he's like suggesting that would be an unrestricted language, a universal computer with unlimited memory, type 1, further down, proceeding from that. But these are grammars. Generate context-sensitive languages requiring a linear bounded automaton with memory proportional to word length. Type 2, generate context-free languages requiring a push-down automaton with a memory stack in which a fixed number of elements are available at any point. Type 3, grammars generate regular languages requiring a finite deterministic automaton with no memory. So you can kind of see how this might apply to like an ontological ladder. Maybe some things, some automatons, some tellers with no memory, kind of like more mindless objects perhaps, would still participate in this language, whereas type 1 and 2 would be kind of between type 0 and 3. Anyhow, I just wanted to go over that because that might be like some of the only part we'll understand in this section. But, and by the way, we'll just finish up this section real quick. I'll try to breeze through it, and then that'll be it for the day. So, physics and mathematics are usually viewed not as languages, but as theories. Even though they are necessarily expressed in terms of language, they are usually considered more specific. But like automata, they too meet linguistic criteria. For instance, mathematical theories have syntaxes, consisting of axioms and rules of inference, and various derived expressions, such as definitions, theorems, and corollaries. More generally, a theory is simply an informational construct that plays a direct, definitive, descriptive, or explanatory role with respect to something that needs to be defined, described, or explained. Because theories consist of recognizable strings of symbols, taking the form of statements and equations, and obey syntaxes, consisting of axioms, principles, hunches, or rules of thumb, and in fact share their syntaxes with the objects of theorization up to descriptive isomorphism, they are languages. Indeed, The very requisites of theorization, namely perception and cognition, are languages in the sense that they consist of sensory or conceptual expressions and conform to logical or non-logical syntaxes consisting of general rules of structure and operation, including but not necessarily limited to the physical structures and dynamics of our brains and nervous systems. Let us quickly review some of the technical details of theoretical languages. Oh boy. A mathematical theory consists of propositions containing basic predicates and functions representing fundamental concepts. For example, set theory is based on the concept of membership. Geometry is strongly dependent, little voice crack there, enjoy that, on primitive concepts like angle and distance. And elementary arithmetic incorporates the more or less basic concepts of addition, multiplication, and order. The symbols that stand for these concepts, sometimes called non-logical constants, form the signature sigma of the theory. Capital sigma. That other one was also a sigma, lowercase. This signature includes symbols for relations, functions, and individuals, each with an arity or valence. Beyond its signature, a mathematical theory contains variables, preassigned symbols denoting objects from a previously specified domain for individuals representing symbols like x, y, z, and so on, logical symbols, logical constants like close to, we're not gonna waste too much time on this stuff. I'm not a not too good at math, womp womp. And elementary language L, sigma, subscript sigma, language of the predicate calculus can be defined as a set of expressions or propositional forms incorporating these logical and non-logical symbols and their syntactic rules. The terms of L subscript sigma are defined as follows. 1. Variables and constants for individuals are terms. 2. If f is a n array function symbol and t subscript 1 all the way to 2 or t subscript n are terms, then ft subscript 1 all the way to t subscript n is a term. Okay. 3. A sequence of symbols is a term if it conforms to 1 and 2. If with two f's. If maybe that's a typo or maybe it's an acronym that I'm totally oblivious to. The acronyms of L subscript sigma are characterized thusly. 1, where R is an n-array relationship, and T subscript 1 all the way to T unscript n are terms. RT subscript 1 to T subscript n is an atomic expression, i.e. an instance of attribution. 2, if A and B are expressions, then so are close to A. Do you know what the arrow pointing up is? No? We'll just say that.
Where's
up
the
arrow.
arrow up?
Right here. Do you see my?
Oh wait, I'm on my own screen, so let's see. I don't remember.
Okay, that's
I think
okay.
A is that is no, it's not. I forgot.
I don't know either. That's okay. Then so are A, all of this. Okay. A up arrow B, A down arrow B, A to B, or A results in B, and this kind of recursive A to B relationship. Okay. 3. If AX is an expression containing the variable x, but not backwards EX or upside down AX, then so are backwards EXA, X parentheses, and upside down
just
A.
clarified that the V thing meant or.
Yeah, it's and an or.
Oh, it's and an or?
Up arrow. Yeah.
Is the down arrow or?
Yes.
Okay. Oh, okay. Thank you. Cool. Okay, so A and B, A or B. Okay. Okay, so 4. A sequence of symbols is an expression only if formed in accordance with 1 to 3. That being these. By nature, the languages of predicate logic are descriptive. Their expressions describe relationships holding within various mathematical structures. It should be clear that in order to define a theoretical language, one simply creates a syntax for it by extending the syntax of logic to accommodate the spatial and temporal relationships necessarily holding among its non-logical constants under all or at least most logical circumstances within the intended scope of the theory. Like the syntax of logic itself, which is a theory of descriptive inclusion, or truth based on the cognitive and perceptual need to distinguish that which is from that which is not, kind of that 1-0 binary, the syntax of a theoretical language is also based on ingredients and imperatives of cognitive and perceptual reality. We have already remarked on the equivalence of automata on languages. The states and state transitions of automata parallel the strings and productions of grammar. The gist is fairly, well, maybe not forthright, but it's a little easier to grasp than getting lost in the equations and the symbols. Although we should potentially at some point go back and be a little more thorough with them. But to find the theoretical language describing any class of transducers, we need merely adjoin to the syntax of logic the non-logical descriptors of their transductive structures and processes. The primary transducers of the overall language of science are scientists, and their transductive syntax consists of the syntax of generalized scientific observation and theorization, i.e., perception and cognition. We may therefore partition or stratify this syntax according to the nature of the logical and non-logical elements incorporated in syntactic rules. For example, we might develop 4 classes corresponding to the fundamental trio: space, time, and object, a class containing the rules of logic and mathematics, a class consisting of the perceptual qualia, in terms of which we define and extract experience, meaning, and utility from perceptual and cognitive reality, and a class accounting for more nebulous feelings and emotions integral to the determination of utility for qualic relationships. For now, we might as well call these classes STOS, LMS, QPS, and ETS. Completely clear. No, he specifies. Okay. Respectively standing for space-time object syntax, STOS, logico-mathematical syntax, LMS, qualio-perceptual syntax, and emo-telic syntax, so be QPS and ETS, corresponding to these, of course. Okay. Along with the high-level interrelationship of these components to the structure of which all or some of them ultimately contribute. Together, these ingredients comprise the human cognitive perceptual syntax, or HCS. Okay, so the human cognitive perceptual syntax is space-time object syntax. Okay. The rules of logic and mathematics, so logical mathematical syntax. Okay. Perceptual qualia, so kind of like definition. Yeah, define and extract experience, like definitional syntax. That would be QPS. And the more nebulous emotions, qualic relationship syntax. Okay. Interesting. As every language user is aware, and this is almost like smaller languages being nestled in broader languages. As every language user is aware, there is more to language processing than recognition and transduction. There's also communication. The concepts of language and communication are inseparable. Languages are abstract structures through which communication is effected, and communication involves exchange of input and output by language users. Anytime we have a syntax, a set of representative expressions conforming to it, and a set of language processors, we have a language and the possibility of meaningful communication among its processors. Where communication conveys information, and information represents relationships, because any instance of information will be relative to other instances, communication is about, and they'll communicate, kind of, okay, is about more than just the states of communicators. It can carry any information representing any kind of relationship. Accordingly, communicators not only accept and transduce language, but use it to represent to each other their views of the world. The communication paradigm is perfectly general and holds on all scales. It applies not merely on the level of expressions exchanged by communicators, but even on the level of basic status information exchanged by the interactive processing elements of an automaton. That is, language processing itself can be regarded as a form of communication. In order to actualize a language through some form of processing, it must be intersected with a processing system that functions through operational communication among its parts. A universal machine, for example, is a self-communication system, relaying information among its abstract components. Indeed, communication is the very embodiment of the three basic operations of a universal computer, namely read, write, and relocation. The structural and dynamical rules of language processors thus correspond directly to the syntaxes of language. Both kinds of system evolve by communicative intersection of syntax and state, or content. So state like information, syntax governing the rules of interaction between instances of information, I'm assuming. It follows that languages and automata can be treated on a par, and that since automata can be treated as self-communication systems, so can languages. In the technical descriptions of automata and languages outlined above, a certain model of the world is implicit. Automata accept input from the outside world, transform it through their internal states, and sometimes return the result to the outside world when they are finished. So a bit of a feedback loop. Language and information are either inside or outside the automata, probably to render the definition of the automata, because if the automata was a defined state, it would have to be relative to other states. And they are inside only part of the time. The rest of the time, the information is presumably either lying around somewhere or someplace else in the environment or en route to, from one place to another. It should probably be clarified that his use of automata here is probably not the exact same as like a teller or mind, but in any case. But where communication happens on all scales, the distinction between inside and outside is not so clear. The languages communicated among language users and processors, and the languages embodied by users and processors themselves, occupy an overall medium with a unified communicative syntax largely indifferent to the distinction. This is getting at the Akashic records, and I'm not going to explain that. No, I'm just kidding. Kind of, maybe a little bit, I don't know. Or adjacent, I don't know. The laws that govern a system may be reposed in the space that contains its objects, or in the objects themselves. Classical physics reposes everything in space, applying spatial concepts like vectors and tensors to fields outside the objects. However, it is possible to apply a logical transformation which inverts the picture, turning it inside in, or outside in, whoopsie. This results in a distributed subjectivization, in which everything occurs inside the objects. Who is this reminding you guys of? We've read him before, okay? Kind of sounding a little Leibnizian, but let's read on. The objects are simply defined to consistently internalize their interactions, effectively putting every object inside every other one in a generalized way, and thereby placing the contents of space on the same footing as that formerly occupied by the containing space itself. Vectors and tensors then become descriptors of the internal syntactic properties of and states of objects. In effect, the universe becomes a self-simulation running inside its own contents. Okay. So that reminded me a bit of Leibniz, of course. More so from the monadology, wherein everything occurs inside the monads, even that which is apparently external to them. And some monads are kind of like automatons. They're not all minds. Minds are monads, but not all monads are minds. According to Leibniz's definition of a mind, of course, but and that kind of makes sense if you think of it like a soul. It's defined by what it is, but also what it is not. So in a sense, it would contain the states of what it is not, and that would be in the processive sense. In the reversive sense, you know, a monad or a soul would also just be unified with its, you know, larger scale monads, and, you know, at the same time, similarly scaled monads by virtue of that derivation. But in any case, This view, which is complementary to the conventional geometric one, is called transductive algebra. The dual relationship between geometry and transductive algebra is called conspansive duality. In conjunction with other principles, including hology and SCSPL, infocognitive telic reducibility, conspansive duality, can afford fresh insight on the nature of reality in the physical world. One simply takes the conventional picture, turns it outside in, puts the two pictures together, and extracts the implications. The relationship of this new picture to the old one is extensional rather than competitive, embedding the geometric model in a larger and more complete conspansive model, uniting it with its dual model. In any case, all equivalent models are on equal footing, and the only scientific hypotheses on which doubt could be shed as a result of this extension are those based on the fallacious assumption that the geometric model is the whole story. All right, and that is where we will end for the day. We have 18 pages left. This was a long one, I know, so I kind of apologize for that a little bit. I'm a little bit sorry.
I'm going to bed now.
Yes. Thank you, Mel, for helping out with the reading and the math.
Although if you have any final things to say, then.
Well, I was actually going to ask you guys if anyone else has any final thoughts. I'll generally give my thoughts as I go through. So at the end, I'm left with just admiration